Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing a book that was inspired by a previous book that's very common in my reading world, and that is Vampire Forensics: Uncovering the Origins of an Enduring Legend by Mark Collins Jenkins. It does have this darker cover and we have this interesting red blood splotch, and this was inspired by a book that I have read recently, and that was Vampires: A Field Guide to Creatures That Stalk the Night by Bob Curran. I read that book and became intrigued by vampire legends. I was not a Twilight girl in my teenage years. I felt like I was too cool for that, although I probably should have just given in to the hype. But vampires as a legend are still very interesting to me as an adult, even if I've aged out of the Twilight genre and the Twilight target demographic. I think that the vampire book kind of renewed an interest in vampires and the legends and how there are so many similar legends from around the world. And that inspired me to do additional reading on this legend of vampires, which led me to this book from my library, Vampire Forensics. And I want to start this review by explaining what I was looking for in this book, because I believe that expectations of a book really feed into how you review a book. This book was a little under 300 pages, and unlike the Vampires by Bob Curran book, which was more of a collection or an anthology of vampire stories, this felt like it was going to be a little bit more academic, and that's what I was looking for. The Vampires by Curran book had a just collection of stories, and there wasn't a lot of analysis on that stories, which is totally fine. I think it was a really interesting collection of a global selection of stories that have vampiric qualities to it, and it was a really interesting read to expose me to legends that I wasn't familiar with before. But after reading that book, I felt like I wanted a little bit more of an academic analysis, if that makes sense. If the academicness, I'm making up that word, I think, ranged on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 might be that anthology. We're not really digging into the who, what, when, where, why of anything in the stories. The author was just relating the stories. And if on the other side is academic articles, I found some with names like The Feminist and Vampire Constructing Postmodern Bodies, or Contemporary Consciousness as Reflected in Images of the Vampires. That's a 10 on the scale. So the anthology of just the stories is 1, and deep dive niche in the weeds articles is 10. And there's a range in between, and there's a place for everything on that scale. There's a place for the anthology. That was a fun starting point. I really do recommend that book if you're looking to just get a taste of different vampiric-esque stories. But on the other side, if you really want to get into the details or you want to get into some niche aspects of vampiric legends, then something closer to those academic articles might be appropriate. Having read the anthology, I was looking for a book that maybe was a 4 or 5 on the scale, where we really dug into the legends, but not using very academic or formal language that would kind of off-put a new reader. This book, I would say, is closer to a 2 or a 3 on the academic scale. So I think my expectations were just a little bit higher for this book than it was, but I don't think the book is actually a bad book overall. So this book, as mentioned, kind of constructs the origins of the vampire legend. The author takes time to talk about, of course, the Dracula novel, the way vampires have been perceived in film and media since then, different vampiric legends from around the world, as well as discussing perhaps origins for where these stories came from. We discussed the plague and the way that dead victims were treated. There's a long discussion of tuberculosis and the way that it can appear to a doctor of the time to just be consuming the person from the inside, kind of sucking the energy away. There's a long discussion closer to the end of the book about how a group of people deals with death and dead bodies and how they interact with that facet of life. And inherently life has death. So how a culture approaches that can impact the way that there are vampiric legends that rise above it when a body isn't doing what the people think a dead body should do, or the belief that is present in a lot of cultures that there is a period after death that needs to be protected because the spirit or whatever is left of the person may have a connection to that body and hasn't fully transitioned to whatever is believed to come next, either resting with the ancestors or wherever the spirit is believed to go after death. So all of that is covered in here, but everything in this book, and here's some of the chapters in case you're interested, all of this in the book is very high level, so we never really dig super deep, but it was filled with a lot of interesting sections. I think the section on the plague were probably the most interesting to me. When the plague was moving through Europe, there were a lot of beliefs around people coming back from the dead, and there were different funerary practices that were brought in place, like putting a brick in a woman's mouth. There's a particular case that was studied from an archaeologist who was an archaeologist he studied bones, and he discussed how this was designed to stop someone from chewing on their bodies, and that was something that was believed to have happened. So while this book was really good, I think it was, again, very high level, and I was looking for something a little bit more academic, just a little bit more detailed. However, what I think this book would be really great for is if you had this book and you had the Vampires, like the anthology by Bob Curran. The review for that is on my channel. I don't know if I've mentioned that. If you had both of those books side by side and you read the anthology and then you read this as like your basis. So the anthology will give you a wide range of stories. This will give you a basis to kind of work from, and from there you can seek out more additional information about vampires. There is a bibliography in the back, so I might peruse this and see if I can find anything in here that might seem interesting to further my reading. I'm assuming the author, Jenkins, compiled from more academic sources to make something that's more accessible to the common lay audience like me. So maybe just going up a step and trying to find something with a little bit more detail and nuance would be the right move for me moving forward if I want to continue to explore vampires and their legends. I do think this is a great introduction to vampires, though. If you're completely new to the subject or your experience has just been the Twilight vampires or vampires of other YA or fantasy novels, by all means, this is a great introduction, and I think this, along with that Vampires by Bob Curran, would be a great pairing to start reading on this topic. If you have any books on vampires that you would like to recommend, please leave those in the comment section below. As always, I appreciate your comments and your support. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.